All right. Hey, welcome back. I am Reed Galen. This is the Home Front Live. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Waj Ali. Waj, welcome.
Hello, sir. Reed is not having a midlife crisis, folks. He is having an allergy attack. But I just wanted to, I just wanted to play that up a bit. I'm like, he is so distraught. He is so passionate about democracy that this man weeps. This man weeps for you, America. I told him, take 5 minutes, take a Zyrtec, but he's such a trooper that he is having his allergy attack while he hosts this live. So thank you, sir.
No, listen, you know what? There's nothing better than being in a hotel room in New Jersey while your allergies attack you, but that's okay. As you said, democracy demands perseverance. So here we are. And again, thanks, Wad. It's funny because I think in a past life, you and I probably would not have seen eye to eye on many things. We probably wouldn't have been in the same room almost ever. But here we are in a brand new world. My guess is my evolution has brought me far closer to you than
Mm,
anything. But maybe we were never that far apart to begin with. But I want to talk today about all things considered, if we avoid nuclear war, which is a big asterisk, a big mushroom cloud shaped asterisk, like what do we have to do to build? What are the structures? What are the ideas? What are the philosophies that have to come? Because last weekend we saw the big No Kings events, 5 million, whatever, millions of people, they said. And I just want to read something that my friend Evelyn Quartz wrote. She wrote, um, protests with real demands, housing, wages, public control, the end of surveillance would threaten far more than Trump. It would confront the system that both enabled his rise and sustains him, the modern monarchy of corporate executive financiers, tech platforms, and private equity, all governing without consent. Now, the funny thing is that if you read that, because she wrote it on another incredible individual, Grace Blakely's Substack, who is
yeah.
a Marxist economist of all things, is that I believe that there are just as many people on the left side of the aisle who would agree with that as there are, I should say, on the right side of the aisle as there are on the left. That there's this impending sense that the system has gotten wildly out of control. The tentacles are far too long and deep and expansive in American life. So give us a sense of how you see what we have to do from here. Trump notwithstanding, Trump will go at some point, but what's going to replace him when he goes?
Yeah, it's a good start and a good framing, and I believe people have the capacity to change, to evolve, to also devolve, and I think
Yes.
the circumstances dictate how people change through time. And I think a greater there's a greater coalition, a greater, if you will, symmetry between Americans beyond the cultural wars and the ethnicity and this and that when it comes to the majority understanding that the establishment is not working for them, that the individuals who are in charge of the establishments, right, they are our modern quote unquote kings. That the 1% is taking from the 99%, right? That the money is trickling up and nothing has trickled down, right? That workers are actually more productive than workers in Japan, in Europe. I'm talking about American workers,
Sure.
leave more vacation days on the table, work harder, work longer, are dying, and are actually more productive. But they do not see, or they do not reap the benefits of their work, right? The sweat of their brow just basically leads them closer to death. Meanwhile, all their work is, if you will, used and abused by the 1%, right? And so the No Kings rally, I think, if we could expand it, Reed, Kings does not just represent the authoritarian, wannabe authoritarian regime of Donald Trump. Kings, if we were to be honest, folks, refers to the 1%, the people in control, the oligarchy, right? The caucusocracy, the kleptocracy, the billionaires, the people who are the gatekeepers who are profiting off a system that for far too long has pitted us against each other. But at the end of the day, there's this great cartoon, this single cartoon. I don't know if you've seen it, where Rupert Murdoch is sitting at the head of the table. There's a white worker to his left. There's a black worker to his right, right? Everyone has a plate. The white worker has a few crumbs. The black worker has a few crumbs. Rupert Murdoch's plate is overflowing with cookies, and he turns to the white worker and says, "This guy's taking your cookies."
Right.
And I mean, I mean, there's been variations of this, right? So I've always said, Reed, and I've been saying it recently, that the twin sins of America have always been white supremacy, racism, and greed. White supremacy and greed. And until we confront these two sins, until we dismantle these two sins, until we excise these two sins, I think this country will continue down this path. And so, this next step, in my opinion, and you alluded to it, right, where people might have a lot more in common than they have differences. Let's talk about it. Let's be really blunt about it. How did a Donald Trump also get support from people who wanted Bernie?
Right.
Let's take it to 2024. How did people who voted for Donald Trump as president also vote for AOC when it came to her race? Now, you look at them and they are opposite. They're not both sides, right? What's the commonality? The commonality is Bernie and AOC, much like Donald Trump, said the following: the system is rigged. The system isn't working. The swamp needs to be drained, right? I'm an outsider. I'm willing to take a bulldozer, right? Now, with Donald, you and I know, bullshit artist. What are you talking about, bro?
Right.
You were born with a silver and golden spoon in your mouth. You're a child of privilege. Your daddy gave you $400 million, and you're such a dumbass that you squandered that money. You live in friggin' Mar-a-Lago, and you and me with the gray hair, we remember that he was in Trump Towers. There's no art of the deal. Complete bullshit, but he sold the bullshit, right? He sold the bullshit as an outsider. The insiders suck. They don't care about you. I'm an outsider. I'm going to come and fix the system. Now, with AOC and Bernie's and others, especially AOC, uh, she actually is authentic. Her dad died. She had to go working class. She had to work as a bartender. So when she gives that same message, it resonates with people. They're like, yeah, don't sell me bullshit, Reed. You can't tell me that, here I am working two jobs and everything's fine, which is why you see a young generation. I don't know if you've seen these polls, they're very disturbing, folks. They have no faith in capitalism, no faith in democracy, no faith in the American future, right?
No.
It's like all, yeah,
But
like,
why would
and
they?
you can't blame them, right?
Right.
So this is where I think then this is why the Democrats aren't winning. I don't know if you saw that a piece yesterday where it came out in the New York Times. The Democratic establishment, the DNC folks, is struggling for money. Why? Because people are like, just because Donald Trump is underwater doesn't mean, you and I are old enough. We know that if one political party was underwater, that meant the other party would benefit.
Right.
Right now, you're seeing Donald Trump underwater with the Quinnipiac poll. People ain't going to the Democratic Party, folks. Democratic Party is hemorrhaging. So this is where, and I believe the problem is the Democratic establishment is still holding on, Reed, to this type of romantic centrism, this type of restoration. And what you and I believe are this conversation is going toward is restoration ain't going to cut it. You need
Right.
reformation.
Well, that's 100%, and I think that was one thing that I heard. And again, I think this is notwithstanding the number of people that showed up to No Kings events. I think it was more about what the speakers at these things were saying, and that was one thing I heard at the one I went to in Salt Lake City was, we need to protect our institutions. Okay, well, theoretically, yes. I mean, in the abstract, yes, but if nobody believes that the institutions work anyway, or that they don't work for them anyway, like what are you protecting? And that's, we had, last year when we traveled the country for the union, we had these big democracy defender T-shirts on. We might as well have just said status quo, right? Like that might as well have just what it said, because to your point, like not only did Trump recognize that the system is rigged, he represented change, which is coming, whether, which is not good or bad. But I think the other thing that both he and Bernie and AOC did, and again, I want to go back to something you said about where he came from was, yes, he came from a lot of money, but you know where he didn't come from? Manhattan. And that's the only place he ever wanted to be. And so when he speaks to that being ostracized, to that being that feeling like that outsider, right? I think that Bernie and AOC and Trump all do that. They all communicate that well. And the other part too, you said about the authenticity is like, you can't be authentic by saying, you know what, Waj, I'm being authentic, right? It's like if somebody comes up to you and goes, Waj, you know what, I'm a really funny guy. You know how you know I'm not a funny guy? Because if I was a funny guy, you'd be laughing, right? Like I'm not, and so that's the point is like, if you have to say it out loud, it's probably not true. And so those are the kinds of things that I think, to your point about the Democrats, they can't get over themselves. It's like they want to tell you that they care, but you clearly know they don't. And it's not because they're bad people necessarily. It's because they're locked into a mindset that can't imagine something different than has worked for them every other time
Yeah.
right, for the last however many years. And I saw this great clip. I don't know if it's great. I saw an incredible clip. I'll say that with Ta-Nehisi Coates and Joy Reid in New Orleans,
Mm.
like 3 months ago. And Coates says this. He says, "What have the Democrats done since 1992? They lost education. They lost labor. They lost choice. They lost the environment." And he goes on through a couple of things. He goes, "So what was all this about? What was this all about? Like, what were we doing? If we keep losing everything, what was all this about?" And then I saw something yesterday that said on another social media site, the Democrats need to be for individual responsibility, efficiency in government, blah, blah. And watch, it was the Republican Party I grew up with.
Yep.
Right now, look, there's a lot of people in this country who would probably take that, but that's a retread. That's a retrograde movement, not one in 2025, where, as you said, 14 million Democratic voters stayed home, and an entire, almost the biggest generation, right, in this country between Gen Z and millennials saying none of it matters anyway. And when that happens, I'm afraid, Waj, that's when people disengage and people worse than a Donald Trump come in because nobody's involved.
You know, I've been saying this for a while. I've been saying this for about 8 years now, ever since the rise of Donald Trump as a political force. And I think this week and the past week has proved it. What I've said is the following, and this isn't just Democrats, folks. This is when it comes to the institutions, the institutional leaders. I'm talking about corporate media, law firms, the billionaires, anchors, certain personalities. They aren't built for this fight, Reed.
Right.
They aren't made for this moment. I'll repeat that. They aren't built for this fight. They're not made for this moment. And you could tell after 10 years, it's been a decade, folks. This mother effer has been around for a decade. They're still flat footed. How can you still be flat footed after a decade and then claim to be a leader and then want to lead us, right? You still don't know how to fight him. You don't know how to acknowledge the threat. You can't name the threat. You still engage in euphemisms. You still think you can handshake Freddy Krueger and Freddy Krueger won't, stab you with this friggin' glove of daggers, right? And like, each and every single time you're trying to court, and no offense to this I have this mythical voter called Chet. Chet is this alleged centrist white voter who lives in the Rust Belt and drinks real coffee in a real diner and has always voted for Republicans. The Democrats were like, "We're gonna court Chet," and Chet literally says now in 2025, "I think you're pedophiles and I want to kill you." And they're like,
Right.
"You know how we'll win, Chet." And Chet literally says, "I'm not into you. I haven't been into you for 10 years." And they're like, "No, no, no. We must court Chet." And meanwhile, there's Reed, there's Waj, there's Latoya, there's Jose. All these other people are saying, hey, Democrats, hey, we're here. We just want you to fight." No, no, no. Chet, right? And you see Alyssa Slotkin, of all the people that they could choose to respond to Donald Trump's state of the, whatever that was, state of
Mhm.
the verbal diarrhea, they chose centrist former CIA officer Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan. And then Alyssa, I saw her retort. Do you remember anything that she said? Going to your point, you know what the only thing people remember Alyssa Slotkin
Ronald
saying?
Reagan.
Praising Ronald Reagan. This is the year 2025, folks. We're like, interesting. Okay. And then Alyssa Slotkin comes out last month. She goes, "I have a war plan to defeat Republicans and win back the majority. We have to adopt the goddamn alpha energy of Dan Campbell, the Detroit Lions coach, and we have to declare war on the weak and the woke." And regardless of what you think about the woke, why are you using Republican right-wing language to attack your own base? Right? So there's no vision. It's like, let me put it this way. You see these Star Wars behind me? One of the worst
Hmm.
Star Wars movies was Rise of the Skywalker, the one that just came
No.
out.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Okay, now why am I mentioning? Don't worry, folks. You don't have a Star Wars geek. You could clearly tell they were shook. They were shook by the criticism online to Last Jedi. So instead of having the courage of their convictions, instead of leaning into the story, instead of saying we don't care about what some people say, this is what we believe in. This is our story, and let's lean into it. Episode 9 was just a shameless, weak, flabby type of, let me just give the audience what I think they'll like. Nothing stuck. The audience is like, you have no courage, no bravery, right? The character arcs make no sense, and you've betrayed us, right? And it ended up being, in my opinion, one of the worst Star Wars movies.
Right.
The Democratic Party is Rise of Skywalker right now. They're just throwing stuff. thinking that this will give you fan service. Oh, Chet, you like this? Okay. All right. You want this? Okay, suburban press, right? But what people want, Reed, is authenticity. What do you believe in? Do you believe in anything? Do
Right.
you stand for anything? Are you willing to fight for anything? And the answer from the establishment is no. And I'll give you another example.
Sure.
It took Tucker Carlson. I can't believe I'm saying this, folks, but
It's been an upside down week.
Tucker Carlson is a piece of shit. You agree? I agree. Why? And I've been saying this for last week, and it was proven true in the past 2 days. I said last week, I have more faith, Reed, in the America First Republican wing of the party to keep us from war with Iran than the Democratic establishment. And then I give you Tucker Carlson's interview with Ted Cruz. And I ask you, where's Chuck Schumer? Where is Hakeem Jeffries? How come the Democratic establishment has not been louder than Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Tucker Carlson in warning America about a war with Iran? You tell me.
And Josh Hawley.
And Holly.
Right. And but this is the funny thing. Let me just say a couple of things. One is the reason I brought up the performative thing was especially because of Slotkin, because of those words she used. Like we have to like again, if you have to say it out loud. But I just looked this up while we're sitting here. 125 million Americans have been born since 1989, since the year that Reagan left office.
Mm.
Right. That's a third of the country. That means a third of the country wasn't even around when he was president, which means that probably at least half the country doesn't remember him being president, right? So the only thing they remember is probably Reagan won the Cold War. I'm not going into all that. But the point you make is it is not an unreasonable idea for Americans in 2025, where we have had arguably the most tumultuous 25 years in our history since 19, since between, so let's say, since 1920 and 1945, right? In the last 100 years, because every 3 years we have something horrible happen,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't just affect one small group of people, but affects everybody. And usually, as the people you talk about at the bottom, far worse. It is not an unreasonable thing for people of varying ideologies to say, we just got out of 20-year wars. Are we really trying to get back into one? And this has nothing to do with the people involved. Now, I know it does politically and ideologically for some people, but broadly speaking,
Oh, yeah.
if the guy said, I'm getting elected to stay out of war, then it would be my expression of, are you kidding me, guys? That like the thing we want to do is go back into a new war in the place we just got out of, right? And who
Literally.
else would like that? The Russians would like that. The Chinese would like that, right? And, all the bad guys would like that because, again, tie us up geopolitically. We can't afford it, right? We already can't afford it. And so this is I think, a mass belief, Waj, that like, no, we shouldn't do this again. And it has very little to do with how you feel about Israel or how you feel about Iran, and in the broader context of like, is this where we want to do now?
And a
Especially
majority
after
of Americans, the polls came out yesterday, a majority of Americans are like, no, we do not
right,
want war.
right,
No,
because
it's one of those situations, and you're right. Uh, and here is, let's talk about Democrats again. We see the polls. Overwhelming majority of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, are anti-war against this war. They do not want U.S. to join Israel in its strike against Iran. They do not want to join World War III. They're deeply worried about our involvement. They're deeply worried about blowback. They're deeply worried about spillover. They're deeply worried about U.S. security, specifically our troops, folks. The largest troops outside of America are stationed in Qatar, right? Also, it'll be a target on U.S. tourists, U.S. soldiers, Jews, right? Furthermore, escalation. Why? Because we remember the war on terror and the failure in the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? Also, how much is this going to cost? Also, Reed, didn't Donald Trump say he was America first? Didn't Donald Trump promise American strength and security? Didn't Donald Trump promise to be the non-interventionist president? So I'm not a guy who consults with politicians. You're that guy. To me, that would be a slam dunk. People still have fresh memories. It's only been 5 months into his presidency, right? And yet, mouse farts from Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. And the reason for it, and let's be blunt, is Chuck Schumer just 2 weeks ago was more hawkish and supportive of a strike on Iran or regime change in Iran in the video he did than even Republicans like Massey and others. So this is why the New York Times article that came out yesterday, folks, late last night, showed that the Democratic Party is struggling for cash. Now, you would think that with Donald Trump underwater, he's at 38%, according to the Quinnipiac poll, right? A majority of Americans are against his assault, unleashing of the National Guard and the military against U.S. residents and citizens, the terror that he's unleashed in L.A., the trade wars, utter failure. He's underwater on inflation. He's underwater in the economy. Now people are slowly realizing, oh, shit, maybe elections matter. Now we have a friggin' madman, RFK Jr., who loves eating pets and heroin, is now, you know, literally a guy who's not a doctor. That was one of my worst fears was about RFK, of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I was like, people still haven't picked up on how dangerous RFK will be. And now you're getting a taste. This guy's literally removing all the experts and putting in cranks as freaking measles is spreading in the United States of America in the year 2025. People aren't coming to America. Tourism has dropped. We're going to lose $12 billion. All this shit happened in friggin' 5 months, Reed. And now a war. You and me, if we were there, we'd be like, let's go. You just loaded our ammo for the next 6 months. Ads,
Right.
messaging. Where are they, Reed? And the reason they're not there is they're part of the same system. I hate to say this, they are. It's not both sides in the sense the Republican Party, and in my opinion, I think you agree with me, has now become a violent right-wing authoritarian force. If people think I'm exaggerating, I give you the weekend, I give you Vance Bolter, I give you the assassinations, and I give you the response of the Republican Party, Mike Lee and others. The Republican base folks lives on Earth 3. They literally think it's still a leftist Marxist, even though Vance Bolter is a Republican voter, Trump voting Christian nationalist nut. But we've lost him. We've lost him, right? It's
Look,
30%.
I mean, I was on a plane yesterday, and you can always tell the guys in Comfort Plus on Delta, right? The guys my age and look like me, watch Fox News screens all through the section, right? And it was still like Trump closed his border, Biden left open. That was the headline I saw when I looked over. Like to your point, right? Like,
Earth 3.
oh, right. And so here we are now. It's June 19th. Happy Juneteenth to those who celebrate, by the way. But to your point, right? That is a means to an end, which is to keep them in the box. But here we are now, and this is what I wrote about yesterday, which is when you have people like Hawley or Carlson or Massey, right? Especially Massey and Carlson. Hawley is, I have no faith that Josh Hawley believes in anything other than what he thinks will advance his own interests. But if he's a means to an end, use it,
Use them.
right? Is you can go after the MAGA movement, but don't start up here. You got to start down here. And here's the other part. You don't, with this stuff happening, you don't have to editorialize on it. You just have to serve it up and say, is this what you voted for? Did
That's
you
it.
vote for this? You don't have to say, hey, moron, right? Told you your guy was lying to you. You just have to say, here it is, right? And I think that's the other part. So you've got Democrats who say nothing because they're just afraid. The whole thing is predicated on fear. And I will also say this, Waj, is that they're short of money for two very big reasons. One, because
Mm.
the small dollar giver who gives out of pure belief is not giving, but also the high dollar donor who gave hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions over the last however many years are like, you guys are terrible at this. I'm not giving you any more money. Right. So like their financial strengths are up and down the economic scale. Right. Like nobody wants any. I mean, I've talked to some of the donors. They're like, all of this stuff they've been telling us is bullshit.
Absolutely.
Yes, of course it is. I mean, and that I used to joke, right? When I first started working alongside Democrats, at the, beginning into 2019, beginning of 2020 with the Lincoln Project, like we always sort of joked, like, I can't believe we ever lost to you guys. Now I'm like, I can't believe we ever lost to you guys. We should have been a right wing dictatorship in the 70s, right? Like, I
No,
mean,
you're right. You're right. Yeah, because they're part of the problem, right? And look, Reed, you might appreciate this old school reference. Charlton Heston, when he was president of the NRA, that famous clip, he held onto the riot pole and he said, "You're gonna have to pry this from my dead head." Right?
right.
And that, I mean, look, you literally have Democrats dying in office. Let me give you an example, folks. Uh, and I mentioned this, and I'm sorry, I got to bring the receipts. 5 months ago, Democrats had a chance. Okay, AOC, probably one of the most well-known, dynamic young leaders across the board, right? You love her, you hate her. Most people actually really like her, but she's well-known. She
Hmm.
threw her hat in the ring, Reed, to be the head of the Oversight Committee, right?
Right. Hmm.
Okay, who was she up against? Jerry Connolly, who 5 months ago was 73 years old and announced, "Oh yeah, I have cancer." So you can't make this shit up. Nancy Pelosi, from her hospital bed, got out of her hospital bed and whipped up votes for Jerry Connolly. Jerry Connolly, God rest his soul, was a great representative, died last month at the age of 74 from cancer. Jerry Connolly, folks, couldn't figure out how to use Zoom, right? He literally was doing these Zoom calls with these old Dutch angles from like artistic new wave French movies, right? And this is who they got. And like meanwhile, I checked out like Jerry Connolly's Instagram. He had 4,000 people. AOC had millions. All right,
Yeah.
another example. Director of communications, right? A person who's been crushing it 24/7, goes to battle no matter where. I saw her literally do a live hit on MSNBC using her phone as she was sitting in Comfort Plus about to take off, Jasmine Crockett.
Mhm.
Do you know who they gave it to? 71-year-old Debbie Dingle. Have you heard a single dingle banger in the past 5 months, Reed? Like, what are we like? They refuse. It's like almost like they believe that God has given them this role, right? And that this role must be passed down to the children, right? And I always say, you have to earn this role. You're a public servant. You know, this is not given to you by God, right? You're not part of the aristocracy, but they are literally dying in office. And meanwhile, Republicans, who I think Democrats, if they had a strong opposition based upon fight, passion, and values, really, I think they can run circles around Republicans, right? And the reason being is Donald Trump has never cracked 50%. And even with domination of the media, disinformation, all the money, this dude barely beat Kamala Harris by
Correct.
1.4 points.
And that's the point. But this is Waj, but this is the point about everything that you just said. It was 14 million Democrats staying home that lost the election.
Yeah, they're like, peace
Right.
out. You
Right.
haven't
Like,
inspired me.
and you know what? I remember last summer I was doing a hit on MSNBC with a gentleman, an African American activist, and I can't recall his name, and I'm sorry for that. And he said black voters are gonna, they might just decide that the couch gets their vote, right? And I was like, there's no possible way, right? I've been
JD
doing this.
Vance has already claimed that vote.
Yeah, he's got the couch
Sorry.
vote.
So I had to.
He's
I
that
had to.
cornered. But to your point, like, and I've talked to some of my other friends in the activist space on the left, and they're like, these people have nothing for me. They have nothing for me. They have nothing for my people. Right. And I was talking to one gentleman last week who's like, who didn't go to the No Kings event? People who work on shift, right? People who just got home from the 12 to 8 shift, or were working the 8 to 12 shift, or the 12 to 8, whatever it was. Like, they weren't at the No Kings event because they had to work. And I'll tell you this, like, at least in Utah, and this is a very Utah thing, like, the folks I saw were the kind of people who go to REI and spend $1,000 and like not feel it.
Gotcha.
Right. Like, I'm glad they were there, but like, we shouldn't be under any illusion that that's enough to get us where we need to be,
No.
which is, if you talk about marginalized communities as if and I do believe that there's genuine concern, but you're not among those communities. You're not listening to those communities. You're not talking to those communities. I mean, and I've told this story many times. Last fall, I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan on a Saturday in a pretty rough black neighborhood. I talked to a gentleman who was just getting out of his car. He just got home from work. And I said, who are you going to vote for? And he said, I guess I'll vote for Harris. She's the lesser of two evils. But you know what else he said? It doesn't matter. Both parties are the same coin. They both got
I've
snakes
heard
on
that
them.
also. Yeah,
Right?
same thing in Virginia.
But he didn't show up. He didn't vote. Because for him, as a bishop in Detroit said to me 3 years ago, my folks look out the window and their lives don't change. Doesn't matter who's president, right? And so they'll do one of two things. They'll vote for the Democrat or they'll stay home. They're not going to vote for the Republican. They know what to get. And that's exactly what happened.
And we see the comment section. Kuganini, she said, pardon me if I didn't mispronounce her name. She said she's in her 70s and she agrees that we need new blood. And when I say old blood, I want to be very, deliberate here and intentional. I'm not talking about age. Old blood refers to mindset, folks. It refers to
Right.
mindset. You can be in your 80s and 70s, but if you have the new mindset and you're a fighter, I'm with you. I'll saddle up right behind you, right? You could be 40 years old and 50 years old, and you can actually have this old mindset, this ossified mindset that truly believes in this romanticized vision of the past, where we'll go back to the 90s of neoliberalism, right? And it'll be fantastic. And this is which was Biden's mistake. But Biden, he did what he had to do. There were strengths of Biden, there were weaknesses of Biden. And one of the mistakes of Biden was probably a product of his age, was he kept talking about restoration. And he kept saying, folks, we're not like this. And a lot of Americans, like you just said, Reed, they're like, This is how it's always been. What are you talking about?
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
people are like, especially people of color, poor folks, they're like, what does he mean? No, this is, greedy bastards taking all the money, everything going to the top, we getting screwed. What do you mean this has not been like this? This was the America that my daddy knew and I knew and my kid knows. Look at Michigan, right? You look across the board, white, Native American, Black, Latino, like we can't escape this. There's no middle class. What do you mean restoration? No, I want something different, man. I want a better future. And Biden was unable to articulate it because Biden, I think, due to his age and due to also being ossified within the system, he was able to stretch himself enough, which I was very impressed by. On certain things, he stretched himself. On other
Right.
things, couldn't evolve. Palestine couldn't evolve, just could not evolve. His base is sitting there. Republicans are saying, I think we're seeing a genocide in real time. Biden just could not shift, Reed, right? Biden couldn't shift on that, and he couldn't shift on this type of reality that even Democrats fail to acknowledge that they can't make deals anymore. They can't sit there and have like bourbon with like Mitch McConnell and slap him on the back, right? Biden
Right.
still kind of believe that I can make a deal with these guys. This is a right-wing authoritarian force. If it's a knife fight, they will bring a bazooka and Democrats will bring a pencil. Who do you think is going to win? And
Yeah.
then what they'll say is, look at these pedophiles and terrorists. They brought like an entire army. And even though you'll see Democrats with a pencil, like you said, thanks to Fox News, they'll be like, yeah, they brought an army. You're right. If you don't believe me, folks, I give you the absolute horrific spin on Vance Bolter. They're calling him a Marxist and a leftist. I give you Mike Lee, Mormon, super Mormon religious senator from Utah, who still has a pinned tweet mocking Governor Walz. Why? He knows he can get away with it. So what you need is a new type of fighter, Reed, who wakes up with a new message. And this is why, if you look at who are the Democratic fighters that people like, 26% AOC, 26% we don't know, right? And then down the list. And
Yeah.
then AOC, I don't know if you saw her at Zoran Mamdani's rally. I'm glad she finally said this because I've been saying this for a while. There's a cold civil war in the DNC, folks. If you know politics, in the past 5 months, there is a vacancy for the throne. Everyone's jockeying for the vacancy. No one's come outright and said it, right? But you're seeing people jockeying. And then she said it yesterday, a couple of days ago at Zoran Mamdani. She says, each and every single time we, meaning, progressives or young people,
Mhm.
have come to the establishment and tried to work with them, she openly said, they have literally said, we don't want you. They've
Mhm.
thrown us aside. And again, folks, people think, oh, they're the troublemakers. I want to remind folks, who was the first person or the first group that rallied behind Biden when he said, I'm staying in the race? Anyone take a guess? Black voters and progressives. It was
Right.
Bernie and AOC. Why? Because they understand coalition building. Kamala Harris, who were the first people to rally behind Kamala Harris as Nancy Pelosi dragged her feet. Anyone take a guess? Black voters, progressives, coalition building, right? And what you've seen, Reed, is the Democratic establishment say, we would rather take an Alyssa Slotkin and destroy the Democratic Party than expand our imagination to include an AOC. And, Republicans try to do that with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump just bulldozed through them, and they're like, all right, now we got to concede. So I still don't think the Democratic Party, from what I've seen, Reed, and tell me if I'm wrong, to me, it seems like they'd rather burn the DNC down than actually accept that their base is now AOC and Jasmine Crockett and Bernie Sanders and Chris Murphy and Chris Van Hollen. Like, they would rather do everything to keep them out than to expand the tent. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think so. And speaking of cartoons, there's that one cartoon of like the little weird dog with the hat on and the fire's out, the fire's it's surrounding him. He goes, this is fine. That's establishment Democrats.
Yeah,
That's what they are. Because again, this is you think about this, and we got just a couple of minutes left,
sure.
is Chuck Schumer has been in elective office longer than I've been alive. And I'm 49 years old.
I did not know that. Wow.
Right? Since
Wow.
1975, that's the only job he's ever had as elected official. After he got out of Harvard Law School, he got elected to the legislature, got elected to Congress, and then got elected to the United States Senate. He has never been out of elective office. How is it possible that we should expect that he has any conception of how to fight something other than what we have? Right? Like he's just incapable of it. I think about this is like, you know why he voted for the continuing resolution? Because somebody in New York City called and said, you're not going to tank the economy today. right? Like
That's
that's not going to be
exactly
you,
what I've been saying. That's
right?
exactly what I've been
That's
saying.
not going to be you, but nobody wants to say that out loud because he raises all the money. Well, so what? You keep losing, right? Money was not your problem last year. Money was not your problem in 2022. Money was not your problem in 2020. Money was not your problem. Money's never been the issue, right? Money has never been the issue for Democrats. The fact that Democratic donors have not been willing to build the institutions like right-wing donors have, that, for the last 50 years is, I think, a big part of why Republicans can win, even on the margins. But look what happens on the margins, Waj, right? Like, why do you think they cared so much about the United States Senate? Why do you think they cared so much about courts? Because they knew the only way to impose a worldview that they know the vast majority of Americans disagree with is to enshrine it in the judiciary,
Yep.
right? Which they were happy to do while they were saying judges shouldn't legislate from the bench, right? Like they're not afraid. Like you have to think three-dimensionally, even four-dimensionally. Live in a tesseract, for God's sakes, right? Like you have to understand the enemy you're up against, or I should say the opposition. I don't want to start enemy talk, but this is where Democrats have they think two-dimensionally, right? Maybe one-dimensionally. I don't even know what a one-dimensional thinking looks like, but the idea of they can walk or they can chew gum. But when they walk, they trip, and when they chew gum, they almost choke. So God forbid they try and do both together.
I'll use the word enemy, and I'll tell you why. Uh, the modern MAGA movement, and I'm not talking about all conservatives. I'm not talking about all Republicans. I'm talking about the
Sure.
modern MAGA movement. And if people think I'm being hyperbolic, I give you the past week, folks. And I'll also give you my conversation with Robert Jones that went up 2 days ago. He's the founder of PRRI, Public Religious Research Institute.
Oh, sure, of
Fantastic
course. Yeah,
poll.
he's
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah,
So they've been doing polls, the intersection of religion and politics, right? And for the past 10 years, I've known Robbie for a while. Robbie comes from, white Southern Baptist. He knows the hymns. He comes from that community.
right.
He's now progressive, but he knows that those are his people. And as you know, Reed, white evangelical Christians in particular are the base of Donald Trump and MAGA. And he's been waiting for 10 years. He's been asking question after question, seeing what's the bottom, what will be the breaking point, what will make them finally leave Donald Trump. And in this conversation, which is quite sobering, 2 days ago, I asked him. What will make them leave? Can we win them over? Can we change them? Can we reach out? Can we change some hearts and minds? And Robbie, of all people, said no. And why did Robbie know? Based upon last week's PRI poll that came out, that he said even like, shocked him. And the poll that they asked was about the immigration, the war on immigrants. And he said these white Christian MAGA folks, the base of Trump, are now fine, Reed, with rendition,
Hmm.
internment camps, rendition to other foreign countries without due process. And they're even fine with creating these types of moats and border security. And they even asked them, well, what happens if people die? They're fine with that. And then this was before Vance Bolter. And I'm willing to say, folks, that MAGA movement, I'm not talking about the voters. People don't have horns on their head. This movement is an enemy to democracy. This movement is a right-wing authoritarian force, a fascist force. I believe we have to crush this force. Now, it's always better to capture and convert. Capture and convert's always better. Welcome them. But I'm talking about 25 to 30% of this ecosystem that's hermetically sealed in right-wing media. Reed, I think we've lost them for my lifetime. Now, I don't say
Yeah,
destroy them, but this movement and its leaders is an enemy to democracy, is an enemy to the majority. And now we have to evolve to think like that. We have to think like that. And if people think I'm being hyperbolic, and I know we're running out of time, January 6th violent insurrection. I give you the friggin' National Guard and military on the streets against friggin' LA residents. They arrested a 9-month pregnant woman who's a citizen. They don't care. They went after Padilla. They were going after Mayor Baraka. They went after Brad Lander. You saw the videos, and then they lied to your face. This is what we're dealing with, and I want a fighter to step up. Reed, damn it! If you're unwilling to fight, retire. You're useless to me, and you're useless to
right.
democracy.
Well, a controversial but great general in our history, George S. Patton, once said, "Lead, follow, or get out of the way."
Amen.
Wash, where can everybody find your work?
Uh, hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm at the Left Hook Substack, like a fool. I've kept no paywalls. I'm not an idiot, but I am a fool. If you have some money, throw in some money. But I'm like Blanche Dubois. I depend on the kindness of strangers. But I do it so people can be informed. And this conversation with Reed, which which he'll have up, and I'll restack. I want people to be informed, especially as our rights, our democracies are under threat, not just here, but also across America, folks. Excuse me, across the world. We're in a fight against fascism. So join me on the Left Hooks, the lefthook.substack.com. Become a free subscriber. If you have a couple of bucks, become a paid subscriber. And also, I co-host Democracy-ish with the wonderful Danielle Moody. If you think I'm blunt, good Lord, listen to Danielle. I'm like the calm man to Danielle. I'm the straight man to Danielle. We host Democracy-ish Monday and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube on Danielle Moody's YouTube channel. So we'll be live tomorrow at 12 p.m. And support Reed. Become a subscriber to what Reed's doing. Give him a few bucks. We're independent. We're fools. We're doing this ourselves. I have kids. Reed, do you have kids?
I'd have two, yes.
Yeah, so
13 and
there you go. I
15.
got three. He's
Yes.
got two. So, but again, the economy is tough. We understand. Try your best to at least support. And what we're trying to do is build out an ecosystem of people who perhaps 10 years ago would never be caught dead talking to each other. But here, Reed texts me. I hope Reed doesn't mind me sharing
No, no, no.
as we're exiting. Reed's like, I actually agree with you 85% of the time. So here
And
we
that's
are.
and when I text you, I say it out loud just like that.
Yeah, like, oh, I actually with the allergies. But you know what? Because
Exactly.
the thing is this, folks. Like if you see the people who come on Left Hook, you see the people Reed has. You're seeing different Americans come together because it's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. I always tell people this. I'm a realist. If you give me a list of 10 things, if I don't agree with you on like 3 of the 10 things, fine. But if you and I agree that our children deserve to grow up in an America where they can walk the streets with safety and security, and they can have healthcare, and they can have economic opportunities, and this country is wide and big and generous enough to stretch and accommodate them as co-protagonists of the narrative, join my hand. You're a fellow American. And then there are other Americans right now who say people like Reed and Waj, they're the enemy. We have to unleash the National Guard against them. We have to excise them. And that's what we're dealing with fascists. So if you are against fascism, join me and Reed and join the Left Hook.
Amen. As always, gang, please join me over at the home front. Thank you so much, everybody. I will be back here in just about an hour. So you can find that here on Substack. Waj, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, man. Take care. And I hope the Zyrtec kicks in.
Thanks so much. Everybody else, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Later.